Hello and welcome to the UX Tea Break. In this episode, I look at automating expert reviews. So this question comes from LabX at Sperientia, and they ask the following question. In the light of so many jobs, activities being automated by AI, how likely is it that UX inspections and expert reviews can be automated? Well, what a great question. So this got me thinking about how would you go about automating things like an expert review? What things could be automated? What things might be more of a problem? And I think a good analogy here is with accessibility testing. So for example, we know that there are some automated tools that you can use to evaluate the accessibility of a website for people that, for example, are using a screen reader. For example, you can use automated tools to check that any of the images that have alternative text, for example. And that's something that you can do with an automated tool. You don't need a person to have a look at that and check whether or not that's the case. And I thought about using that as like an analogy with expert review guidelines. Could you do that? So I thought it would be interesting to take a look at a tool that I put together. Let me show you that on screen now. And this particular tool is a set of usability guidelines. They're kind of based on the Nielsen guidelines. They're based on Schneiderman's guidelines. They're based on various guidelines for what makes a usable system. Including, I think there's principles from ISO 9241 in here. What I did was I took loads of different sources and kind of boiled them down into more specific guidelines that could be used to evaluate, in this instance, a website. Now, whether or not, the important thing is, can you automate these particular items? Now, some of them on here. So if we take a look, for example, at the page layout and visual design. I think there's some things on here that's quite obvious that we can test. So items that aren't clickable do not have characteristics that suggest they are. For example, there shouldn't be underlined text, which would indicate that it was clickable, even though it wasn't a hyperlink. That's something you could easily test in an automated way. The functionality of buttons and controls is obvious from their labels or from their design. That's a bit more problematic. Clickable images include redundant text labels, i.e. there's no mystery meat navigation. That's something we can check for. So there are clearly some that we can test and some that are going to be more problematic. And particularly, for example, if we look under the task orientation checklist items I've got here, for example, the site is free from irrelevant, unnecessary and distracting information, or the site avoids unnecessary registration. That's something we could test automatically, but the critical path is clear with no distractions en route. As I went over these, it occurred to me that, well, yeah, there are definitely some that we could automate, but the vast majority of them require some kind of judgment to be made. And I think that's always going to be the case with user experience. And that's because it's not a binary thing. It really depends on a good knowledge of users, the environment, and their tasks. I'm puzzled as to how we could build that into an AI system that they had sufficient knowledge of users, particularly when it needs to be nuanced. Like a good example is to do with consistency. Often we want systems to be consistent from one screen to another or from one application to another, but that consistency shouldn't be foolish consistency. Sometimes things can be inconsistent for a reason. They're going to be consistent with the task, and that might mean the visual design in some instances is inconsistent. I don't know how an automated system would be able to make that nuanced choice. So I think the possibility is that we could have an AI tool that would allow us to check some of the more boring standard items in our checklist that we have. But I can't see an AI system ever being sufficiently sophisticated that it would be able to carry out an expert review at the same level that a human reviewer could do that. I hope that answered your question. Please give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and also post a question below, and hopefully I'll get around to it in a future video.